My concerns regarding this partnership, I think it's everything to do with attitude, to be honest. I think their game styles match, but I do question whether they're going to fit from an emotional perspective, from a personality perspective.
You know, shot for shot, do they have like all the shots? Can they play all the styles? And they really do, right? I think Stupa and Lebron are both players that offensively, they've got absolutely every shot they can. And alternatively, it can go really bad in the sense that they just have to adapt their games quite a bit. And I think especially Yanguas will probably have to adapt quite a bit in terms of taking probably a lot of the aerial game, a lot of the offensive weight, whereas before definitely with Stupa and even with Garrido probably didn't need to do as much.
I think their game styles actually do match, just because you've got Yanguas, who's become a very aggressive forehand player who can generate a lot of winners, and you've got Coki, who's actually more of a defensive player. They're both young. They're both very willing to try and win the net very quickly. So I think that, again, this partnership makes so much sense. We've got, Momo González, a backhand player that's more of a forehand player, defensive, limited unforced errors, and then a forehand player that is a lefty and ultra aggressive. I mean,
welcome to the Paddle Pod, your weekly podcast covering professional paddle, presented by Hugo and Gons. We're on to episode 81, and as always, joined by my co-host Hugo here today. Hugo, it's great to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Gons. One of the times that I feel the happiest, because we're back for a new year. And I mean, even though I've got a new haircut, the rest of content and excitement is exactly the same, or even better. So yeah, can't wait to get started, and really looking forward to today's episode.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, there's definitely some improvements that we want to do this year. Obviously, we want to increase the quality of our content. So, you know, getting kind of better equipment, better cameras. And maybe in light of that, I do want to apologize for the rather plain vanilla background that I've got going on today. It's definitely something that I will change going forward, but just had to find the right spot, and the house is a bit of a mess right now. So yeah, just thought I'd keep it rather professional, but you know, in plain, I guess, kind of plain looking, if you will.
Mate, it looks great, and I'm sure our fans agree that the important stuff is actually the content. So we should probably get cracking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we've got some really interesting content to start the year. So, I mean, it's the pairs have shapen up. Of course, we're actually not that far away from the start, because this year the tour starts quite a bit earlier than last year. If I'm not mistaken, last year was the end of Feb. And this year, if I'm not mistaken, the 10th of Feb is the first tournament, or certainly the kind of the beginning of the second half of Feb, the Premier Padel Tour will start. So a little bit earlier, which is great, because obviously we couldn't wait that long for paddle. And that means that obviously players have to, you know, decide their partners rather quickly. And of course, we're already kind of halfway through, or nearly getting to the halfway of January. And we wanted to kind of focus on that in today's episode. We wanted to talk about the new partnerships and kind of give our thoughts and our feelings. And we will be starting this based on the rankings. So those partners that kind of are higher up in the rankings, sorry. So that means that we're going to kick things off, which maybe one of the more interesting pairs, I think, and one that we've kind of been long waiting for, and that is none other than Franco Stupaczuk and Juan Lebrón. So Hugo, do you want to kick us off and kind of let us know your thoughts about this new partnership?
Yeah, definitely. And just to give our fans a bit of context, I'm sure a lot of them are aware anyway, but the current rankings look as follows. So you have Goya and Dabia obviously sitting at the top with about 39,000 points, and they have more or less 15,000 points between them and Chingoto and Galan, who sit in second. Now, that's a huge difference. I didn't actually think it was going to be that big, also based on last season's, race for the number one spot. But I guess towards the end of the season, there was a bit of a dip from Chingalan, and Obviously, Goya and Dabia were just sensational and made the final or won every tournament for about 6 months in a row. So it makes sense. But then, so Chingalan, as I say, sit on around 24,000 points, and Stupa and Lebron sit on around 16,000, if I'm not mistaken. So an 8,000 point gap or so, which actually isn't that big. And I think this is obviously one of the reasons why Stupa and Lebron have decided to team up together, because they now have actually quite a big gap between them and the four-seeded pair, which we'll come on and talk about in a little bit. But it's Coki and Yanguas, and they sit on about 10,000 points, if I'm not mistaken. So again, almost the same gap between between Coki and Yanguas, and between Lebron and Stupa and Chingalan. So you'd probably say you're quite surprised, but probably moving on to what I think about the pair. I mean, we've always said that Stupa and Lebron make so much sense due to a number of reasons. I think their game styles actually match and are quite similar. They're both very aggressive, ultra attacking. They like to take risks. So I think we can expect a lot of winners from them, and probably a substantial unforced error count as well. Now, Lebron going back to the forehand makes a lot of sense on paper. That's where he's reached the peak of his game. And we've both shared our concerns regarding his potential on the backhand side of the court, not in terms of whether he can perform there. I mean, he has performed there and he's proved himself there, but being able to challenge the top pairs was probably too much of an ask from him, to be honest. And I think he now has probably the biggest chance that he's ever going to have to challenge both Chingalan and Goyon Tapia by having teamed up with Stupa. Now, from Stupa's perspective, I think he's increased his level towards the end of the season. He was playing really, really well. And even though I'm slightly surprised that he's moved away from Yanguas, given that they'd reaped some very good results towards the end of the season, including beating Chingalan twice in a row, which is obviously incredibly impressive. I think that he's bet on Lebron because, Lebron was the number one seeded player in the world for over 4 years, and he reached the top of the rankings with two different players, which not many players can say. I mean, I think it's Lebron, Bella, and I don't think that many others. So, I mean, obviously that puts into perspective how well Lebron has done and the fact that he's one of the best players ever. Now, my concerns regarding this partnership, I think it's everything to do with attitude, to be honest. I think their game styles match, but I do question whether they're going to fit from an emotional perspective, from a personality perspective. I mean, Stupa has won with pretty much every partner that he's played with, and I think he's very happy to adapt to partners. But will Lebron fit into that partnership that Stupa and Pozzoni have? I mean, it's obvious that he's going to be coached by Pozzoni as well. And we've seen how Pozzoni tries to favor, I'd say, Stupa a little bit across the pairs that he's had. So will Lebron be happy with that when things aren't going well? Will kind of things explode on the benches? That's probably my bigger concern. But as I say, from a playing perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I genuinely think they're going to challenge for the top spots. Probably not, let's be honest, there's almost a 20,000 point gap between them and Goyan Tapia. Unlikely that they reach the top of the rankings. But I do see them challenging Chingalan. What do you think, Gons?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of the things you said. To me, they're like a kind of surefire semi-final pair. I think that they'll be right there challenging Chingalan. And actually that matchup will be very interesting because you've got, as you mentioned, two very offensive players against Chingalan, where clearly Chingoto is not as offensive as Lebron or Stupa. So that matchup, I think, will be very interesting. And one of the keys for me as well is going to be how do the draws shape up for them, especially early on, right? Because we saw last year that there wasn't a lot of variation in terms of draws. So if they end up on Goyan Tapia's side, then, that could be really challenging. So it's going to be very interesting to see where do they fall, and if they manage, to go into like Chingalan's side, or if it's at least a bit more varied, like week to week, then I can definitely see them up there. Another thing that I really like about them, and this is something that we've spoken about before, and that I like to use when analyzing pairs, is shot for shot, do they have like all the shots? Can they play all the styles? And they really do, right? I think Stupa and Lebron are both players that offensively, they've got absolutely every shot. They can smash, they can volley, they can play slow, they can, play a rulo, and defensively as well, right? They're great with the aerial game in terms of just throwing lobs, but they're also great playing low, and if they have to slow down the points, they can do that. They can play fast as well. So the partnership just makes a ton of sense. And from a game style perspective, it does seem like they are suited to each other. They kind of want to get to the net as quickly as possible and play that fast game and stay there as long as possible. And if they have to finish the point, they can absolutely do that. As you say, the thing that's maybe concerning is the mental side. And I will add another thing, which is maybe not a huge point, but I do think that when you talk about them challenging for the number one, it can affect them. And it's how Lebron is going to be from a smashing perspective on the right-hand side, because at the beginning of last season, when he was on the right, he did seem to struggle a bit in that front. Now, obviously, he was playing a lot of that with Paquito, and maybe the kind of how the game went, and how he had to position himself and all of that could be an influence, and maybe with Stupa's a bit better. But when he was on the left, his smashing clearly improved. Obviously, I think that's also a point to the fact that from the left-hand side of the court, it's just a bit easier because of the angles. But it'll be very interesting to see if he kind of is able to maintain just that decent efficiency, above, like, if you're getting like 52-53% on a smashing on the right hand side, I think that would be quite good. But we'll see, because he did struggle with that, I think, at the beginning of last season when he was on the right. So that's kind of the only points I would say, apart from obviously the mental standpoint, which when you've got Lebron, it's always a thing that you have to consider.
No, 100%. And to be honest, when you think about the mental standpoint, it's always the case with Lebron. And I think Stupa is probably one of the best guys to manage a personality like Lebron, just because he's played with absolutely all kinds of people. I mean, he's played with Alex Ruiz, very chilled out, very positive player. He's played with Pablo Lima, experienced, slightly older perspective. I mean, he's played with Yanguas now, very fiery, actually quite similar to Lebron. And they've ended up being really good mates. He played with Sanyo back in the day, did really well. They reached the number 2 spot in the ranking. So, I mean, he's played with a large variety of players and won with everyone. So I think this is probably one of the best players that Lebron could team up with. And maybe Lebron needs exactly that. Maybe the Nenno was a bit too chilled out for him, maybe a bit too nice. And maybe if Stupa bites back at him, which I'm sure he will do, because Stupa is a player that does not keep quiet. And to be honest, Bozzoni is exactly the same. I think maybe that could be something that Lebron needs. And to be honest, I was actually reading an interesting interview from Stupa with Marca, one of the leading Spanish sports newspapers. And they kind of alluded to exactly what we were saying. What happens if Lebron starts saying things on the bench and starts having a go at you? And he obviously said it in a jokey way, but he said, well, I'll just say, hey, think about the rankings, think about who's at the top. And I was like, okay, that's quite fiery, but I mean, makes sense. And he speaks his mind. So I think that actually could work. I mean, from maybe one extra point from an analytical point of view, and how I think this pair could, generate a lot of winners and win a lot of points, is through Lebron's chiquitas. Stupa mentioned that as well in the interview with Marca. He said, how do you think it's going to fit? And what are you going to be your main kind of strengths? Lebron obviously is one of the best players in the world regarding playing chiquitas, maybe even the best. He's so quick to play them. He's got such finesse from his ground strokes that he can very easily play a chiquita, regardless of what ball has come into him previously. And Stupa is the quickest, or one of the quickest players in the world. He's so quick to make up that distance between the back and the front of the court. So I think that's going to be a way that they generate winners. They create a bit of chaos in the opposition, because you just don't know what to expect from them. And I do totally agree with the smashing point of view. Well, the smashing point. Lebron obviously struggled with that towards the start of the season next to Paquito. It's strange because, as I told you this week, Gons, I was actually watching the final of the first tournament last season in Riyadh when Lebron Galan beat Goyan Tapia in 3 sets. And Lebron smashing was unreal. And that was from the forehand side of the court. So I just think he has to maybe played a little bit more safe than he was playing it with Paquito. Maybe not go for that many smashes, but just go for them when it's a higher percentage chance that he wins them. And I think that's exactly what he did in that final towards the start of last season. And honestly, smashing that match was unreal. I mean, probably about 70% efficiency. So yeah, that's what I'd like to add. But yeah, maybe we should move on to the fourth seeded pair, if you agree.
Yeah, of course. So I think other than Stupa and Lebron, I think this is definitely one of the most interesting ones, and not necessarily because of where they fall in the ranking, but just because of the distinct players that they are, right? I think Coki and Yanguas couldn't be further away from each other from a playing perspective. I mean, even physically, right? You've got Yanguas, who's just a beast, incredibly tall, and then you've got Coki, who's slightly smaller. So, and the fact that they play on kind of opposite sides of the court, where in respect to where you normally would play, it's actually quite funny. I mean, if someone that's not watching or has never watched paddle before, and they're rocking up a Coki and Yanguas match, and they're like, "Well, isn't it supposed to be the other way around? Isn't Yanguas supposed to be on the left side and Coki on the right side?" So yeah, just really interesting. And I think, to be honest, I think it could go two ways, right? Initially, I think that they can either be really good just because of the kind of surprise element, and I guess unorthodox, and kind of, I think it would be a strange pair to play. So I think sometimes we've seen that with new pairs, that they surprise other pairs and other players. So I think in that sense, it could go well. And alternatively, it can go really bad in the sense that they just have to adapt their games quite a bit. And I think especially Yanguas will probably have to adapt quite a bit in terms of taking probably a lot of the aerial game, a lot of the offensive weight, whereas before, definitely with Stupa and even with Garrido, probably didn't need to do as much. Now, he's definitely improved in that front, so I can see him very capable of doing it. I just have questions around how long will that take to come into effect. So for me, the kind of base case of what I see most likely to happen is that they'll struggle early on, but then they'll get to a point where they probably kind of improve their games. They kind of get better at each other, those balls down the middle, all those things, the play style that they want to do, and they'll improve. Now, will it get to a point where by the time that they're actually getting good, Yanguas gets a call or something like that? Then that's the question, right? So that's my only concern, but I think it's going to be really interesting for them. I mean, I think Coki as well is going to have to adapt a bit, because he's obviously was playing with a lefty in Jon Sanz for quite a bit now. So I think that will take some period of adaptation as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be quite fun to watch them. Quite a good ranking as well for them, to be honest, having that fourth spot. So, they should have a decent chance at least to make the semifinals. And if they do that, I think that would be extremely, not overachieving, but I think it would be like, I would be kind of very glad if they managed to make semifinals consistently. But in terms of long-term viability, I don't see them. I think this is genuinely going to be a very short-term project, just because I think Yanguas has got such potential, and I think the players at the top are really going to be looking at him, especially Galan.
No, I mean, I totally agree with your final point regarding the fact that Yanguas is one of the best forehand players in the world, no doubt, full stop. I mean, based on last season, he was last season's most improved player. And when you look at the forehand players shot per shot, I mean, Goya is obviously a level above everyone else. But I honestly think Yanguas is very, very much at the same level as Chingoto, and maybe even higher in a lot of ways, because of his attacking potential and the amount of winners he can generate, and just his aggressiveness. Because actually, from an unforced error point of view, his count is actually quite similar to Chingoto's, which is, I mean, baffling how you can generate so many winners without committing a lot of errors. So I agree. I think it's going to be a short-term project just because of what can happen with the pairs above them. I think Yanguas, if things don't go well for Chingalan, for example, at the start of the season, will Alan look elsewhere? And if he does, will Yanguas be his call? It could be. It could also be the Nenno. And so that may mean that then probably Yanguas and Coki could stick together. So I do agree that the future of this pair is going to depend a lot on what the other top pairs do and how that trickles down. But from a performance perspective, I think they can actually do really well. I mean, the ranking is going to help them a lot. It is true that they only have about a 500-point gap between them and the fifth seeded pair, which is the Nenno and Garrido. So the first few tournaments are going to be key. If Coki and Yanguas can make the semi-finals throughout the first few tournaments, at the very least, then that's going to give them an even bigger points gap with respect to the fifth seeded pair, with respect to the Nenno and Garrido, if they obviously don't make the semis, which would mean knocking out one of the other top four seeded pairs. So I think if Coki and Yanguas make the semis throughout the first few weeks, then that's going to be a huge help for them, because it's going to mean that they can stick as the fourth seeded pair and not have to face the big dogs until the semis, which we've seen how important that is, really. And we saw that throughout the whole of last season and, to be honest, every season. So I think that's key. I mean, I think their game styles actually do match, just because you've got Yanguas, who's become a very aggressive forehand player who can generate a lot of winners, and you've got Coki, who's actually more of a defensive player. They're both young. They're both very willing to try and win the net very quickly. So I think that can work. And let's not forget, they played together not that long ago. And obviously they were totally different players back then. But they were actually quite successful. And I mean, they get on really well. They're actually good friends. So we know how much that can add to a pair. And maybe one final point is the fact that they're both probably in their best moment from a career perspective. I mean, Coki Nieto last season was one of the most improved players. I'd probably put him second, straight after Yanguas. There were a number of months throughout, probably towards the middle of the season, where Coki was honestly sensational in the sense that he was actually challenging the top backhand players from a winner to unforced error ratio. And he was actually smashing a lot, which is something that he wasn't actually doing further back in his career. And obviously, we've already spoken about Yanguas. So I think when two players join and both players are at the peak of their game, then that's probably a recipe for success. So yeah, I'm encouraged. I really like this pair. I think they're going to do well. It's just a question of how viable it is that they stick together going forward, which I think if Goya and Dabia continue to dominate as they have, then pairs will probably change sooner than later. I mean, I'm talking any other pair below them. And that will probably end up meaning that Yanguas is going to pair up with one of the other top backhand players. And obviously, I'm thinking of Ralan because he's already played with Stupa.
Yeah, I think that's a very strong possibility, and I would kind of see that happening. But it's a very interesting partnership. Like I said, I think it's going to be quite fun to watch them play. And then maybe moving on into the next pair. So I think this is the fifth seed, right, Hugo?
Yes, indeed.
So this would be, is it Garrido di Nenno?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you were mentioning exactly. So Garrido di Nenno, really like this partnership. I think it just makes a whole lot of sense. Really like it for Garrido, just pairing up with essentially a better version of Bergamini, just your classic forehand player who's super solid. I think their game styles match a lot. Di Nenno's really fast. Now, arguably Di Nenno may be coming off his worst year, I'd say in definitely in a while. So we'll see how he will be. But I think being with someone like, or pairing up with someone like Garrido, who can take so much ownership of the offensive side, I think it will do a lot of good for the Nenno. I also think that Garrido mentally, he just seems like a really nice bloke. He's not very emotional in the sense of just like, throwing tantrums in the benches or anything like that. And he obviously just came from Lebron, and we saw a lot of times in the benches where Lebron was kind of not engaging or anything like that. Garrido just kind of seems like a player that really wants to work things out and willing to cooperate a lot with Nenno. And I think that's kind of or at least it seems that it's kind of more the attitude that really kind of helps Nenno then give his best and brings the confidence in him. So I think they're going to be a really good partnership. I mean, they've got like I said, obviously depending on how the draw falls, but I could see them really easily challenging for example, Coki and Yanguas, I think that would be a really interesting matchup. So, if they do fall on the same side, then potentially that can make a path for them to reach the semifinals. Like you said, Hugo, they also have a very close point gap, so they could easily become a fourth seeded pair very quickly. So to be honest, I think that this could, given how the top half is and thinking about all the players, I do see this as it could be a nice long-term project. And by long term, I think in paddle, yeah, how it is nowadays, you probably have to think about a year. So I could see them, if things go well, them sticking together this year, unless maybe, I would see Yanguas going with Galan, but could he potentially go back with Garrido? I think that will happen definitely at some point. Maybe not this season, but I guess my concern is more, I would see Garrido potentially leaving the Nenno rather than the Nenno potentially leaving him, given that the Nenno's already gone with Lebron and Stupa. And I do think that Galan would probably go Yanguas first.
Yeah, it's a good analysis, and I very much agree. And just to clarify the points situation, because I slightly misread it. But anyway, Lebron and Stupa are very much sitting at 16,500. And then it's Coki and Yanguas at 13,200. And Nenno and Garrido at 13,080. So it's less than a 200-point gap. So obviously that is going to change within the first few weeks. I mean, unless Coki and Yanguas always reach the semis, and then Nenno and Garrido don't pass the quarterfinal barrier, then obviously that points gap is just going to get bigger and bigger. But first week, say Nenno and Garrido face Yanguas and Coki and they beat them, then I think they automatically go on and become the fourth seeded pair. So Nenno and Garrido could very easily become the fourth seeded pair very quickly. And their points gap between them and Lebron and Stupa is about 3,000 points, which is actually not huge. So I agree. I think I like this pair a lot on paper. They've actually played previously. I mean, they played together previously, which is actually obviously always an important point that can help them, particularly at the start, to fit in more quickly. I mean, I just think it's a partnership that makes sense because of the way they play. You've got a traditional forehand player next to a traditional backhand player. Nenno, very safe, very, very few unforced errors, very happy to work for his partner, to help his partner, and to put him in a situation where his partner has to win the points, just play that final ball. And Garrido is exactly that. Ultra aggressive, unbelievable smash, one of the best on tour, great volleys. And I think he needs that player next to him that just gives him that safety to try things, to be aggressive, to go for his smash. And I think Garrido's shown that when he's in an environment where he feels comfortable, that's where he performs at his best. And I mean, we saw that with Yanguas, right? They matched up really well, and we saw the best version of Garrido. So I do very much think that this can happen next to Nenno. I agree, personality-wise, they're both great guys. They're both super positive. I know that Garrido has struggled from a mental perspective, but I think that's been more due to personal issues. And I think that Nenno is going to be the perfect partner in the sense that Garrido will benefit from having a player next to him that always bigs him up. And Nenno is exactly that. I mean, he's probably the nicest guy on tour, as we've said previously. So, yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to watch them play together. And, well, I do think the concern, once again, from a future perspective, i.e., will they last, is all down to the start of the season for Chingalan. Because if Chingalan don't perform, basically, if they don't challenge Goyan Tapia for a number of weeks or months, Galan will most likely look elsewhere because he is obviously the best pair in that player in that pair and in that top three of best players in the world currently, alongside Coelho and Tapia. I think we all agree. And when Galan looks elsewhere, there's two options that comes to mind. We've already said Yanguas, but Nenno is very much the other one. It'll be one or the other. I really don't see Galan looking elsewhere, to be honest. And in a lot of ways, I think Yanguas makes more sense because he's more aggressive and he can probably match up better against Coelho and Tapia if that happened. But we saw that, well, we know that Galan called Nenno back in the day when he was still playing with Lebron. And that was when Stupa and Nenno said, no, actually, we're going to stick together and give the Superbibes another go. Didn't actually end up well for them. But could it happen in the future? I definitely think so. So, I mean, I guess we'll see. But hey, for now, I think it's a great partnership. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think they can challenge all the other pairs that sit within this cohort. I can see them beating all the other pairs. I do think that Lebron and Stupa are just a level above, just from a shot per shot perspective. But yeah, I can very much see them causing upsets across all of these other pairs that we've mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely think that Lebron and Stupa kind of sit above the kind of new pairs, if you put it that way. But then I definitely think that Garrido and Nenno fall in this tier with Coki and Yanguas. So I can very easily see them getting into semifinals, obviously, depending on how the draw falls. But to me, they're like definitely up there in terms of kind of trying to at least reach the semifinal, and then who knows what can happen later, right?
Agreed.
But maybe moving on now, we've got who's the next partnership?
Yeah, so it's sixth seeded is Jon Sanz and Momo González. They sit on around 10,000 points, 10,400 or so. So about 2,500 points between them and Nenno and Garrido. And I mean, I'll just kick it off, Gons. I mean, I think that again, this partnership makes so much sense. We've got Momo González, a backhand player that's more of a forehand player, defensive, limited unforced errors, and then a forehand player that is a lefty and ultra aggressive. I mean, it is true that Jon Sanz can play that slow game, but he loves going for a smash, doesn't he? And I think that's why this partnership can do really well. I mean, the fact that they're both super fit, super quick means that they're going to be so good in transition. And we've seen how well that's gone for Jon Sanz and Coki Nieto. I think they can very easily replicate that now with this pair. And in a lot of ways, Momo and Coki are actually quite similar players in that kind of less traditional backhand player that's more defensive, more happy to sit back and wait for the other player and pair to make a mistake. So I think it can actually work really well. Personality-wise, I think they're going to get on really well because, again, Momo is one of the nicest guys on tour, and Jon Sanz is also loved by everyone. So I think they can cause a lot of upsets. I mean, I think they can beat all the pairs that we've mentioned. To be honest, I do think that they might sit a level below the ones that we've already discussed. So I obviously not included Chingalan and Goyon Tapia. I think they're in their own league. But yeah, Stupa and Lebron, Garrido and Nenno, and even Coki and Yanguas. I like those pairs a little bit more than Jon Sanz and Momo González, but I genuinely think that Sanz and Momo can beat any of them on a good day. And I mean, hey, I think it could actually be quite a similar partnership to what Yanguas and Coki are in terms of a more attacking player, more defensive player. They're going to be slightly hard to predict because they can play in many different ways. So, hey, I mean, I like them. And funnily enough, given that probably these guys are not top of mind for the top players in terms of, looking to partner with them if they want to challenge for the number one spot, then actually this could be a pair that lasts for quite some time. I don't know whether you agree, Gons.
I guess on that point, the only thing I will say is that when there are changes at the top, normally there's like a whole trickle down effect. So at the end of the day, it probably will affect them some way, somehow. That's the only thing I'd say. So I don't necessarily see them kind of as a long-term partnership, but I agree with many of the points you said. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, Momo going back to a lefty, he's had a lot of experience with kind of left-sided players, obviously playing with Alex Ruiz for a bit and kind of being quite successful with him. And Jon Sanz is clearly a level above Alex Ruiz right now. So that would be very, very interesting. I don't think that they won't need a lot of time to adapt in that regard. Obviously, Jon Sanz as well, playing with a player that's very similar to Coki. I do think that they also have the physical element. So Goki as well is just an incredible athlete, to be honest. He's so fast around the court, but I don't think Momo has anything to be jealous of in that front, because he is as well one of the probably fastest players on tour. So I think they're going to be bring a really fast tempo, really quick game. And to be honest as well, Momo, I think definitely towards the second half of the season, I thought he's improved his offensive game a lot. I think he's starting to take on a lot more weight in that regard. I think he's a bit more confident in his smash, and it has been working decently. So I think he's improved slightly there, which obviously brings or it is positive to at least take a bit of the weight of Jon Sanz, because when he does have to be that offensive, machine, he also brings a lot of unforced errors with him. So to me, that's going to be one of the keys. Any partnership that has Jon Sanz in it, I think that you've got a very high ceiling in terms of creating huge upsets, but at the same time, that comes with a lot of risk taking, a lot of unforced errors. So let's see if he's able to manage those. But again, just depending on how the draw falls, I mean, I definitely think that they should be consistent quarterfinalists, and who knows, potentially sneak in with a semi-final here and there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the perfect summary. I think they should make the quarterfinals consistently. Now, if they face Chingalan or Goyan Tapia, even Stupa and
Right.
Lebron, I really don't see them
Yeah.
beating them. But can they beat, well, Coki Yanguas? Definitely. Can they beat the Nenno Garrido? Definitely. And I don't think they're that far away, just because their game styles actually match quite a lot, as you said. But I mean, I guess we'll see. And then, I mean, I know we're missing two more pairs within the top eight. I think the most important one to talk about is the next one in the rankings, which is the seventh seeded pair, and it's none other than Paquito Navarro and Lucas Bergamini. Now, they sit on about 8,500 points, so less than a 2,000 points gap between them and Jon Sanz and Momo González. Now, I think this pair can work just because I think anyone can work next to Bergamini, just because he's the classic forehand player that's going to produce very limited on forced errors, try to help his partner in any way possible. And I mean, his lob is one of his best shots. So he's going to be able to generate a lot of comfort for Paquito to just unveil all the aspects of his game and be aggressive, etc. But being quite honest and maybe a bit too upfront, I think it's a step down for Paquito. I know that Paquito's level towards the end of the season definitely dipped, and it is slightly concerning because obviously he's getting older. And I mean, he shared a few weeks ago in an interview that he has at least a couple more seasons in his locker. He's not actually that old, because I think he's about 36 or so. So I mean, we've seen players in paddle play even 10 more years than that. I mean, look at Bella, retired at about 45. I mean, he is the GOAT, so I guess that puts him in a different bracket. But I still think that taking the first few months of last year, I mean, Paquito was playing so well. I could see him challenging the top backhand players in that cross court battle, which we know is so important. I mean, we've seen Tapia say that Paquito is one of the toughest players he ever played against, and he always struggles against him. So I genuinely think that Paquito still has a lot to say. I just don't know whether Bergamini is going to bring that out of him. I mean, I think Paquito, as I say, is going to feel very comfortable. I think it's very easy to play with Lucas. But I mean, you see Lucas play against the top forehand players in that cross court, whether it's Goyo, whether it's Chingo, whether it's Lebron, whether it's Yanguas, and I just think he's a level below them. He's not going to be able to help Paquito that much from an attacking perspective. And I think Paquito right now needs that because he's not at the peak of his game. So, I mean, I guess we'll see. I think they get on well. But again, I think it could be a bit of a momentary or, momentarily beneficial partnership for both of them. But if the other pairs start changing, I think Paquito's still a great option for a lot of forehand players, but perhaps forehand players that have more points than Bergamini. So I don't think it'll last that long.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, when we look at backhanded players, I'm going to, other than Stupa, Galan and Tapia, which are, the obvious ones, Paquito's right up there, right? I mean, Paquito versus Coki, Paquito versus Momo, Paquito versus Garrido. I generally don't think that he's worst, and arguably I'd put him up front right now out of all of the ones I just
Yeah.
mentioned. So he's clearly still an incredible backhand player, and as you say, probably Bergamini is not on that top tier echelon of kind of right-handed forehand players. Now, it does seem like Paquito's gone back to that classic formula that's kind of been working with him or working for him quite well. Bergamini just being a very similar player to Chingoto and to the Nenno, just your traditional forehand player. And we know those partnerships did work for Paquito quite decently. So this partnership for me makes a lot of sense in that regard, in game style wise. And I think they're a high floor, low ceiling, right? I think they're just gonna make quarterfinals every single tournament, but I don't see them really going above any of that. And there are partnerships out there that I think are quite realistic and also quite interesting for Paquito, and that would be another reunion with Martín and Nenno. I think that would be actually quite interesting. And Jon Sanz as well. I think that would be kind of interesting. And I was actually quite surprised that none of them kind of went or he paired up with any of them this time round. But I do think that one of those will happen this year, to be honest.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I think those two options are great options, and I think they make a lot of sense. I mean, Dineno and Paquito challenged for the number one spot not that long ago. It's amazing to think that, and it feels a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And well, I think probably this time around, Dineno didn't go for Paquito because he probably thought, I want to give someone else a shout. We second parts are sometimes not always that, they don't go that well.
Yeah, that's
but
fair.
I was surprised that Jon Sanz didn't look at Paquito before looking at Momo. I mean, you never know how these things have gone, but I actually think Paquito is a level above Momo right now when you take into account all the aspects of the game. So I think Jon Sanz would have been better off with Paquito. And Paquito's done really well with lefties as well. I mean, he played with Pablo Lima, right? And they did really well as a pair. And quite frankly, I was quite surprised that Yanguas Paquito didn't end up being a reality. I know that they probably don't have the best precedent based on, well, quite literally the final of the World Cup this season. But I think if they worked on it, I mean, the fact that they are both in the top 4/5 players on their respective sides of the court, that should work if you dedicate time to making it work. So, yeah, I was quite surprised. And as I say, I think Bergamini is a sensational player. He'll make Paquito feel very at home, as per se, and feel kind of safe to perform and play as and how he wants. And hey, I mean, we saw Paquito do well with both Chingoto and Nenno. It's just that I think Paquito could challenge for the higher spots in the rankings alongside a different player.
No, 100% agree. And maybe should we just finish off really quickly our thoughts on the final pair? So that's Edu Alonso and Alex Arroyo. So Edu Alonso going back to the partner he started with last season. And, they did do quite well, but being totally honest, I think this is a kind of big downgrade for Edu Alonso, given how well and, the season went for him. Alex Arroyo is probably not the player that he wants to be partnering up with. I mean, I think it's already a downgrade from Momo, and he did do quite well with Momo. So, could he potentially linked up with someone that a bit better than Momo? I definitely think so. So it just feels a bit of a downgrade. I mean, it does make sense. The partnership, right? We saw them not very long ago, and they did work. You've got a very offensive player in Alex Arroyo, and Edu Alonso, obviously, kind of a more traditional four-handed player. So I think match styles and kind of the game, they are suited to each other. But in terms of the level, like player level, and the season that Edu Alonso was having, I just feel like he's gone a step backwards rather than a step in front. So to be honest, I do not think that this partnership will last very long this time around.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think from a playing perspective, it makes so much sense. I mean, they played together when they were young for so many years. They're best mates, and they've obviously progressed in paddle thanks to their partnership because they quite literally have played together for years and years. And you've got a defensive forehand player and an ultra attacking backhand player, so it makes so much sense. But we've spoken a lot about Edu Alonso and said how exciting he is as a prospect. He's super young. He's playing better and better. And honestly, I was quite surprised that didn't end up with Paquito because
Yeah.
I think that, well, right now, Edu Alonso is a more attractive prospect than Bergamini. I mean, firstly, due to his age, but also just all the different sides to his game that he can bring. Actually, we've seen Edu Alonso smash quite a lot
Yeah.
and be quite efficient with it, even though it's not his best shot. So, yeah, I think Edu Alonso can team up with well, quite frankly, better backhand players. I don't think it'll last that long because as soon as we see the top players making a move and pairs changing, when you think about forehand players, Edu Alonso is one of the options that comes to mind very quickly and one of the first options. So, hey, I mean, I could see him, he's already played with Momo, but I could see him being a very interesting option for Paquito, an incredibly interesting option for Garrido. Coki and him would perhaps not work that well together because they're both quite defensive. But I mean, even Stupa, if that ever happened, Galan. I mean, obviously, maybe Galan and Stupa would look elsewhere before Edu. But hey, I mean, he's young. He's only 23, so very exciting prospect, and I think he could do better again with a different player.
Yeah, but anyways, that probably brings us to the end of the episode. I do hope that everyone's enjoyed that. I do hope that everyone's happy as well. That obviously we're back. 2025, great year ahead of us. So please leave us kind of your comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts around these partnerships, and what you guys think about them. And yeah, that's it from me. I do hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time.
Cheers, guys. Great to be back, and see you very soon.